Hello, everyone. We have a slight echo in person. All good? Nope. I can come over there too.
I'm not sure how this is working. So Linda, sorry about the technical difficulty. It wouldn't be a Zoom meeting with the new folks facilitating something like this, but about something like this. So thanks for your patience.
All right. Hello, everyone. Hope I'm within view. I see Spencer can't see himself here. So I, again, am Linda Hillier, and I'm president of BFF Omaha, and BFF Omaha will be leading this creative district initiative along with partners, Citywide Arts Project, the space you're in now, Benson Theater, Maple Street Construct, and all of the other businesses in the neighborhood you can think of. So a creative district is a space that is a well-defined designated space. There are maps on your tables, and I can kind of show it hopefully a little bit on the Zoom screen. And basically, we are proposing to the Nebraska Arts Council to have the creative district go from 72nd Street to 52nd, and basically about a block off of each side of Maple. And we're also encompassing the parks and a couple of schools. There's about 4 different churches in that space. So please feel free to take a peek at that. So the creative district legislation was passed in 2020 in Nebraska, and what it's going to help us do is recognize this neighborhood for what it already is, which is an attractive space for artists and creatives. And it'll help us just like drive economic development more, help us partner with each other, and just kind of create projects that will help improve the neighborhood. So the creative district, as I mentioned, is an application process that we are in the middle of. We submitted a letter of interest to the Nebraska Arts Council back in September, and we were approved to move forward with the application. And the application is pretty extensive. We're working on it right now. We have different committees that we broke up to sort of tackle the sections. So if you are interested, we'll talk about that at the end. There are more ways to get involved as well. And then after we are designated, so we hope to apply probably in April. And after we are designated, we'll be able to apply for some big funding opportunities. So we're super excited. That funding will help us further our goals that will come out of this meeting. So thank you all for being here. And like I mentioned, we're really early in the process. So we are still collecting community input. And so there's still plenty of time to get involved. So please don't hesitate to. I'll go ahead and pass it back to Spencer, and I'll be on chat if anyone has questions.
All right, Linda, thank you so much. And honestly, we wouldn't be here without Linda and folks BFF and the others who have really laid the foundation for this conversation today. So in order to have success with this application, we are required, the state is requiring us essentially as part of that data collect that we get community voices, and that we're not doing that because they're telling us to. As a creative district, we want to lead the way in showing the rest of the state and different creative districts how this is done. So hopefully this session gives you an opportunity to feel like your voice is being heard. But like Linda mentioned, how we can also engage online with that survey afterwards. But to dive into, and go take our conversation beyond what that survey is collecting, we're going to go through a couple different sections of conversation. And this first section and what we want to dive into and talk about is infrastructure within the Benson district. So we understand infrastructure to mean a lot of different things. It's not just roads. It's not just bike lanes. Like it's going to be something that's going to set up our district to really thrive, to make people have easier access to what the district is offering, and ultimately make it a welcoming experience for all. So what's on the screen up here, and it's might be a little tough to read for the folks in person here, but what's on the screen up here is really just a list of ideas that have already been contributed via that survey. And so when we're thinking about infrastructure, again, I want you all to think about infrastructure as more broadly than roads, bridges, and whatnot. And as you're reading through these things, we've got these ideas already written down. And what we're looking to do is try to understand, like, are there things that you all have experienced or have seen in other areas and in other cities that relate to infrastructure or the ideas that are on the screen that you would add to this list? So it's kind of the first opportunity. If anybody has something that comes to mind, I'd love to hear it. Same with folks in the Zoom chat, or either chat or just chime in, and we'll do our best to get things added here. Anything pop to mind? Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, what would be great to see is like more park.
So like a creative based park, like an art park type thing. Yep.
Yeah, like more functional sculpture style. Yeah, spaces.
Yeah. So level up the parks, add some art to parks. Sure. Love it. Love it. Yeah, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm noticing, I mean, affordable housing pops out pretty huge to me, and I think there's just a lot of opportunities to try to cultivate cooperatively run economic opportunities and also housing opportunities. So I think cooperatives and community land trusts is something I'd be really interested in.
Yeah, so I mean, the idea of collaborating, creating cooperative environment, and also maybe even digital infrastructure that could facilitate that. Is that kind of what you're at?
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking more about like collaborative, like public or just cooperative land ownership.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, really more physical than digital.
Sure. Yeah, so the physical kind of collaboration of using the land in Benson was mentioned, as well as affordable housing. Yeah, definitely some things that pop to mind and have been discussed in the past. Yeah, go ahead.
Publicly accessible in some way, commercial kitchen, so that vendors at the market and stuff, for food safety purposes, and so we have to code, will can prepare what they plan to sell. Accessible.
A publicly accessible commercial kitchen sounds right up my alley. I'm a foodie for sure. I've worked in a kitchen, so love that idea. Any others to pop to mind?
Pretty good list. I can't think of anything else.
Sure. No, and I think another one of the things I just want to remind folks up here is we're having this conversation, but when we are done with this, you're going to get an access to that survey link, and it'll allow you, hey, if you walk away 5 minutes after this meeting, you can still come back and provide that feedback. So if it comes up later, hold on to that thought, and definitely there will be a place to share it. If we were to kind of summarize up and distill down some of those ideas that we saw on that previous page, a lot of them, not to just only, we're not talking about all of them here, but the 5 ideas in the top left hand of the screen here, they kind of summarize a lot of the categories of those previous ideas. So when we think about improved parking, came up a lot in the survey. The idea of green space development, the idea of diversified transit options, pedestrian safety, and alleyway redesign. Those are all very frequently heard things. So when I pose those ideas to the group here, I'm curious if we were to take, for instance, improved parking, and we were to think about rating this or evaluating it based on what are the pros and cons of improved parking. Could some of you share some pros and cons of improved parking?
I think a pro would be people outside of the Benson area have easier access. I think a con would be that it doesn't support other transit options. Maybe bike racks, for example.
So improved parking would increase accessibility from outside the district, but in turn, it could reduce investment in alternative modes. I think you had your hand up.
I think it's always just a question. I mean, improved parking would take some of the nuisance parking and concentrate the parking in a more, sustainable way. But you're also always talking about like how much space is being taken up by parking that could be used for some other purpose. So I think being really smart about land use.
Yeah. Collaborating and understanding how do we best use parking. Curious, if you were to, so let's move on to green space development, or any of you. Yeah, go ahead.
Are you able to see the chat?
No, I'm yes, I am.
Would you mind just reading out what Brittany just said?
So the parking benefits district meeting. So yeah, there will be a parking benefits district meeting on March 31st. So for those of you who are interested in understanding what improved parking might all entail, feel free to chime in there.
When I get around safety too,
What's that?
having improved parking could also benefit safety.
Yeah.
I know a few individuals that have really unsafe incidences.
Okay.
That is a good point, because a lot of parking spaces are really dark on alleyways. There's another point, and it's like, we're trying to fix the alleyways more accessible to pedestrians, that makes those spaces. Well, when you have, incidences like that, people really sad happenings.
Yeah. So we're chatting here about the idea of, I don't know, better lighting, for instance, or under positioning parking so that it's safe for pedestrians to kind of go to and from their car. I think that's almost, if you look at a few of these ideas, you'll start to understand that there's something of a Venn diagram where some of them are overlapping. But I'm curious if you all were to look at these 5 ideas and rank them in the order in which you feel like they would make the biggest impact, what would be maybe your top 1, top 2, as far as what you would rank as far as we really need that will make it will have a huge impact on accessibility and folks using the district space. Top 1 or 2 choices
Of the 5 at the top.
of the 5 that are listed. Yes.
I think that safety would have to be first, just because you have to be mostly concerned about humans.
Yeah. So a vote for pedestrian safety.
Yeah. I mean, especially if you consider some of the other areas in Omaha and some of the big, situations that happened, with people when they're out, there's been some newly developed areas that have had some real issues with safety. So I think that as Benson grows in that way, that's definitely a huge.
So the idea of comparing our safety to other, similar neighborhoods in Omaha, I want to kind of dive into that. How do you all feel like Benson compares as far as being a pedestrian in Benson? Are we comparable? Is it worse here? Share kind of what you think?
I think because of the compactness of the nature of the district, just physically, the buildings being pretty small area, pretty back together. It's, to me, it's a pretty good game round. People don't always scoop the ice off the sidewalk we found on the way here, that's a big deal. Uber drivers are probably the worst as far as picking the drop offs. That's around bar hours. Yeah, you have a lot of people parked really poorly picking up and dropping off. That's probably one of it that kind of makes me more nervous walking around than anything. And then people, you know, they're parked in the middle of Maple, some swerving around them because they're sitting there waiting for their tires to come out. I definitely would value pedestrian safety over improved parking. I think there's ways that the two can combine, but of course, you know, the devil's always in the details on that. As far as, you know, everything is always sold as a win-win. And oftentimes when push comes to shove and the final product comes out, it seems to favor one more heavily than the others. I would definitely prefer you know, accommodating the walking traffic or the car traffic. A lot of pedestrian improvements I've seen, like gentrifying in business improvement district areas, looks good on an architecture, an architect's mock-up. A lot of it is like very cosmetically appealing and then photographs well, but the practicality of what it's like to actually walk down that newly improved district is oftentimes I see as just more houseless folks, hostile benches and things of that nature.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, the idea of pedestrian safety it's gonna be human design first. You know, I think that's a really good point for the folks online, pointing out specifically. I think nightlife in Benson, there is a spike in potential for more accidents. I'd say, is that fair enough? Yeah. What about daytime? I mean, does that would you still compare our walkability, safety, pedestrian safety during the daytime? Is it favorable compared to other neighborhoods?
I think overall it's favorable comparatively to yeah. I think that, you know, the way that the street is, like it kind of slows down traffic, like the traffic. I don't feel like a lot of people really speed too far down the main area of Benson, and the sidewalks are a lot wider than a lot of other cities sidewalks. So comparatively, I feel like it is safer. It's just, I think, yeah, some of the off-city street parking with the darkness at night, yeah, as far as like safety issues, those are kind of the biggest concerns.
Right.
We talked a little bit earlier in the afternoon meeting about alleyway redesign, sort of. Spencer was talking about that Venn diagram going well together with pedestrian safety, because if we were to re-envision alleyways as more walkable routes, that would be safer and provide lighting, add green space, and that becomes safer than some of the space on Maple Street. And we talked a little bit about accessibility of our sidewalks and what levels, so a person using a wheelchair can't access Maple Street.
Yeah, Linda, for the folks online, Linda's pointing out the idea of if we were to invest in alleyways and prioritize pedestrian safety in that redesign, it could be kind of a two birds with one stone type of effort. So I'm curious, you know, we've talked a little bit about each of the ideas on the screen. But if we look at kind of likelihood that it gets done and think about the idea of something getting done around here, I want to kind of broaden, ask you all, what that is not listed on the screen or that we haven't talked about, or maybe just maybe we have talked about it, but what's highly likely to get done in your mind? Like, what's something that, gosh, this should be easy and it would be an infrastructure improvement? For me, I could get, I'm not going to do this. I'm not saying I'm admitting guilt, but I could probably go buy some cement paint and paint up the crosswalks to be brighter, for instance. So I mean, that's something quite literally that one person could raise their hand and do with a little bit of funding and approval, and it could get done. Any other, hey, this might be easy for us to do? Ideas?
Development, because I think we can get creative with the smallest spaces and talk to the owners of that land. I'm sure a lot of people that might have it nearby, they own that.
So the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago and today. Might as well get something growing in some of those spaces like it. So I want to kind of move on to the next section. If you all ideas come to mind after we've already moved forward, you definitely hold on to those ideas, write them down, and we can talk to you about it later. Linda, did you have something to add?
I just wanted to call out to any last ideas for our people on Zoom.
Sure, yeah. Are there folks on Zoom? Anything that we've discussed right now that you'd like to add or chime in or raise question or concern about?
Yeah, just actually listening in and digesting some of the ideas you guys have. So, yeah.
All right. Good deal. So this next little section, I want you all to bear with me. I want to tell a brief story and hopefully bring you into a state that we can foster some real creative ideas. So feel free to close your eyes. I want you to imagine yourself. You are in the greatest creative district in the world. There's never been a creative district that has been built and populated and used that has been better than this one. And I want you to imagine all of the sights, the sounds, the smells that are around you. I want you to think about why did you go to this district? Why did you go to the greatest creative district in the world? So think about all of the things that you're taking in, the buildings, the people. What are they doing? What are you entertained by? And then when you open your eyes here, you see and you look around and you say, hey, this kind of reminds me of back home in Benson. Maybe back home on steroids a little bit, but it's the greatest creative district ever. And now I would love for you to kind of share, if we could go one by one, if you're comfortable with it. I want to understand what was the one thing, or what was this idea that helped make that greatest creative district in the world really stand out to you? What was that experience like? They want to jump in first.
A thing that automatically jumps out when I think about supporting the space to be truly creative and vibrant and nutritious for people who are in it is how well it welcomes people of multiple generations, how well it holds, parents' needs, young children's needs of older folks, and how well the different elements work together to support that. And so I work in childcare, and I feel like there's a huge disconnect between the creative kind of experience, entertainment experience of like a bars and restaurants district, and something that's more like a whole like life learning kind of space, like the neighborhood. So like honestly, it's maybe like a weird litmus test, but for me, like a place where you could like call the neighborhood a school in itself, that you could have a kid who like didn't actually go to school but learned everything they needed to know in the neighborhood. That would be like the perfect example.
It's really cool for the folks online who couldn't hear, just to summarize and chime in if I'm not gonna say it as eloquently as you did, but the idea of just being inclusive of an entire life experience, from young kids, families to people learning, and they can take in throughout their youth and even later in life, continue to learn and take from the creative district. It's a really cool comment. Anybody else want to follow that up? Yeah.
Yeah. Closing my eyes and envisioning. I think the thing that I imagine is to some extent lack of cohesion rather than too much prescribed like kind of a vibe of the whole of the neighborhood. I think it, like, imagine walking around the best creative district would be just something surprising around every corner. Every next day, it's just like, how did this come into existence? It's just crazy that this even exists, and then it's the continuous stream of those surprises. I think accessibility is kind of the big one, and then the price point at which to get some, like a bay or space, or to be able to have access to the space in some way that more variety of people can do things, I think, versus it being too prescribed or cohesive from the top down. I think, yeah, I think, they keep Benson the weird. Yeah, I would take more weird. It means, like, I would bend towards the weird part of that sentence, and I'll take some bad weird with it, if that's how it is.
So a creative district is a flowing, evolving space that's open to all, and there's novelty to it. There's, live creation, and the experience is constantly being, not described and prescribed, but grown and cultivated. I love that.
Yeah, I agree with all that as well. I think that, my oldest son, he spent a lot of time in Benson creating, doing, at the time, like, there were, we held a lot of working with elementary schools around here, doing gallery spaces. That was a really awesome thing. We did theater programs, at the old pizza shop. So yeah, seeing more of that, I think with the children involved is definitely like, I have young children again, so seeing more of that happen. And then just like little elements that from, places that I lived and traveled, like it's so, they like so many places coming have these things going on, like why we like Omaha, I feel like Omaha as a whole, like needs that, like really needs something that shines. And that's why I mentioned earlier, like doing a giant art parade. I know that there used to be an art car parade, which I had created 2 of those cars that were in that. But I think like what's even more cooler than an art parade is like a human-centered parade, because the beauty of that, and from what I've seen in other cities, another city that I lived, was the accumulation of the libraries were involved, the public schools were involved, local organizations were involved, local businesses were involved in creating giant puppets, masks, like whatever have you, just art, like, and it was like throughout the year, so it was kind of this accumulation of sorts that led up to this event, and it brought everyone out, and then it incorporated also, the theaters and the galleries and everything. I mean, I know that Benson has like Benson Days. I guess just like taking Benson Days and kind of really like blowing it up,
Love it.
And that's a good segue to just mention that Wayne on Zoom said pre-COVID we had Benson Days, outdoor art festival, art show, outdoor events. So yeah, just kind of revisiting those events and seeing how we might be able to larger.
And to add to that, I mean, the idea of Benson Days, as you mentioned, I think kind of also what you were maybe hinting at is that a creative district is not just a center for itself, it helps drive the city, and potentially is an asset for the entire city, not just the folks that are here. Anybody else? Wayne, thanks for sharing online. Anybody else want to chime in with their hopes and dreams and aspirations of what an awesome creative district is? Oh, okay. Yeah, so online, Brittany, thanks for sharing. Let me read here. I'm going to read it verbatim, and anybody else can chime in, or Brittany, if you want to listen to me and say you got it wrong, add it this way. She says rooftop gardens, growing food for restaurants, more outdoor communal spaces, utilizing alleyways for outdoor seating on weekends, And Brittany, if you're continuing to write, I'd welcome that, and I'll stop what I'm going to say next to include that. But no, I think the idea of, and this was brought up in an earlier conversation, this idea of utilizing space to create more creative density. I think we discussed like that spaces can be used creatively in a lot of different ways, both utilitarianly and then for entertainment, for joy, all those types of things. So no, it's a really good call out, Brittany. Anybody else want to add their hopes and dreams? Love it, love it. Not to crash on the party, but if we are to kind of bring ourselves back a little bit back to reality when it comes to what are some of those improvements that could be done or added to our district already. What we see on the screen or the slide here are a list of things that have already been collected on that survey. And you can read through them if you'd like. I've also gone ahead and highlighted, if you can see it, some of the ideas that popped up more frequently. So you have this idea of grocery store, food market, farmers market, grocery, food, groceries. This idea popped up pretty frequently as far as being one of those additions that not just make a creative district thrive, but we have to have as maybe a necessity. So grocery, food, and also transportation and bike lanes popped up quite often. So both, transportation, bikes, that whole conversation around, getting people to and from and even mobility within the district popped up a lot. And so, if I asked you all previously to think about dream state, what are some of those awesome things? Are there any things that you would add or chime in around, or reflect on this list that you're seeing here? Does what's being called out here resonate with you all?
I like the idea of the dog park or something anyways, being at the HE lobby for a second. Well, that's a big area. A lot to be done with that.
So dog park, the dog park is mentioned here, and I think earlier that got brought up at the meeting as being like that's a step towards inclusion of not just humans, but some folks are their pets are their family. So the idea of including pets more prominently in the area is an interesting idea. Did you have a second thought? I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, that's okay. Even if it were to be something other than dog artwork, it's probably big enough it could be a dog park and still space for something else. But yeah, looking at the map here, there's a kind of almost like a secondary business district, closer to 72nd. I don't feel like it owns all that property. But like, yeah, the idea of connecting those two districts in a more thorough way, I don't know, is an interesting idea. That would look like that would do it.
It's worth a creative conversation. Go ahead.
I was just thinking about an idea that I've had for a while about the overpasses, the pedestrian overpasses to really brighten those up and be more of a draw to the area. We have one here on N, right? 6, and then there's one by Benson West that can be a good addition to bringing more vibrancy.
So make the pedestrian overpass look like it belongs in an arts district.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. Were you gonna? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Trying to kind of folks here.
I always circle back to the need for accessible food in the communities, and I mean, there's pockets of Oklahoma that are food deserts, and that's definitely one not really having accessible grocery store nearby. And there used to be a farmers market event some years ago, but it no longer exists. So kind of just thinking about in the same vein of how we closed down Park Military for Artist Market, closing down Park Maple Street for farmers market to coexist with that.
So on that note, I mean, we're talking about the idea of accessible food, healthy food, nutrition. Throughout the data collect of getting information about this district and filling out the workbook, one thing I discovered in a few stats was looking at the percentage of children that are on free and reduced lunches was roughly like 70% within our proposed area. So you're talking about 7 out of 10 kids maybe needing some help to get daily nutrition. And the idea of having it not be quite as accessible, you kind of compile those two ideas together, that's probably a problem that we could be thinking about, not just as a community, but creatively, folks that, that are going to be involved with the effort to establish this as a creative district, naturally going to come up with creative ideas. So I think keeping that top of mind is important. Go ahead. A lot of grant access to help.
I'm working on an initiative with Family Job to install more community fridges in the community and bring like little libraries or pantries. And so that could be a really good opportunity for artists to be involved too. Designing those, decorating them, and then the businesses can participate in the food drives or just like taking on that responsibility of making sure there's stock.
How cool would it be for the folks on Zoom to drive through our neighborhood, our community, and see a community fridge that's designed by an artist, or a mini pantry that is clearly sculpted, or it has some artistic flair. I would, as a neighbor, as a resident here, I would like 2 thumbs up that. That's cool.
To sort of bolster Brittany's comment online, the people who are growing their veggies on their roofs could sell it at farmers market. And I think that it would be a good marketing. One other thing I just wanted to raise from this afternoon's meeting, which I thought was a really good idea, is thinking about houses that can be used for many functions, with workspaces, diners, cafe, gallery, floor. We kind of talked a little bit about like some of those old houses that function like that. So I thought that was a good idea to pull out here too.
Yeah, I think that idea from earlier was about a dream, like it was the dream state of what is a creative district, and that person described how you go to other creative districts, or maybe they're not technically creative districts, but spots around the US and even throughout the world, and they use spaces just differently. So the idea of stealing, the best artists steal at some point, probably, and then recreate, make it their own. Like, we can steal some of those really creative ideas from other communities to address needs like affordable housing. So great call out. We talked about dream state. We talked about these things that maybe are basic to daily life and really provide just a platform for living and sustaining in the neighborhood. If we are to accomplish even a fraction of what has been proposed, discussed, or what we're dreaming about, or really want to do with the creative district, I think it's going to be important that we're conscious of the idea that anytime there is effort, money, strategy to improve any sort of district, any sort of neighborhood, we have to be conscious of, are the improvements going to make it more difficult for the folks who have been here for decades, who have built the culture, who their lives are woven into the fabric of our alleyways, of our murals, and the landscape? Are those folks, is it more difficult because of the improvements that we're making for them to be here to contribute? And so with this idea, and it's straightforward, the idea of gentrification is one that we want to keep at the forefront of a conversation around establishing a creative district. I want to poll the audience here and folks online. Are there things that either are being done or that you feel like we should be doing that can help us with kind of staving off this idea of gentrification in our district?
community land trusts are huge for doing this. Basically taking land off the market, spaces off the market, business area, commercial space, housing off the traditional real estate market so that speculative investment doesn't drive up costs for everyone.
So community land trusts, sounds like a very technical approach to solving this problem. The idea of just tapping into folks that understand this space more, it sounds like you have a pretty good understanding. I think it'd be kind of crucial to whatever this group does. Anything else that we could be focusing on or should be aware of to stave this off?
I think when it comes to improving the district, generally speaking, I've lived in Omaha for 20 years. I remember I used to show my heart at the pizza shop way back before BFF and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I had definite concerns about gentrification in Benson through when the BFF started. It happened quickly. Mostly I'm pleasantly surprised at how it's not gentrified, at least in housing prices to the degree I expected. Of course, housing prices in the city, but it could have been worse. I think a lot of people like to come to Benson on the weekend, but not everyone wants to move here. So the housing prices hasn't shifted that much. I think being aware of the idea of we want more people to come to Benson. How can we make it more inviting for people to come? That becomes a double-edged sword pretty quickly. At some point, you hit a tipping scale where people that grew up in Millville decide, I never would have considered moving to Benson, and now that we have the ...
Yeah.
And now appeals to me, and hey, now we're moving to Benson. I think figuring out what that is with the ... like what is the tipping point at which people would consider moving here that wouldn't have otherwise?
Yeah.
That's avoiding it because that's gentrification.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a double-edged sword of creating things that are attractive is going to bring folks that wouldn't have populated or patronized our area previously. To be conscious of that. Any other thoughts? Keeping condos away. High dollar, high level rent areas. One of the things that came up earlier, and I think it relates to what you all are saying, is just this idea of education. So is everybody in our community even aware of what gentrification is? Like, do they just hear, oh, we're going to get an awesome new building and a new way of getting around in our downtown? Like, that sounds cool. Or do they understand the real impact that it has on those folks in the community? So the idea of just having people in our district more educated around this idea, popped up. And I think that's one of the things that I don't think any of us in this room or online expects that we're going to stop it, but how do we continue to keep this conversation alive and going as we grow? Yeah, go ahead, please.
I think they're really simple, and it's almost like, a tagline, but to me, the best development is slow, cheap, easy development that people who live in a space can do themselves. And we have somebody from, Connecticut, trying to build a half block mixed use space. That's just not, it just doesn't fit the bill of what's going to be healthy for people in the long term for the neighborhood. So I think it's just I think often when in the past when I brought up gentrification in certain groups, people are like, well, you don't want your neighborhood to improve. You're just saying no to all of them. And I think it's really important to have an immediate response. I'm not saying no to all development. I'm saying no to large development that siphons resources out of our community. And yes to development that is something people do themselves in the community, whether or not that's the flashiest or the most aesthetic pleasing. So slow, small, easy, cheap development.
So slow, organic, centered development using input like this type of forum to bring creative minds into the decision-making process. I love that idea.
I feel like that's how Benson has been. It's been very slow. And 20 years ago, there's how it's changed in the last even 15 years. It has been a pretty significant growth, but it has been really organic, and I think that a lot of people that have invested in Benson are like-minded. And they're from here, they're from around here. I mean, we haven't, it hasn't yet been kind of, you know, I think that a lot of people didn't have, you know, the big money players didn't have a lot of faith in the direction that Benson was going to go. And I think that that is like that was the key. And I think that Benson is enough like off the beaten path that it will stay off the beaten path, but it will become this like really colorful and incredibly dynamic. I mean, it already has, and there's only that much more room to grow. And I think that it's really just awesome to see how it's growing and how it's improving. And I think that those players, they're invested elsewhere. Like there's, you know, we don't have any like ballpark on the way, or you on the way. I mean, that's a good thing. That's what's keeping it low key. And you know, in the art world and being in the art world, I mean, people used to kind of, like I was here talk, you know, people kind of downplaying Benson, and they have no idea. I mean, I feel like it's gonna blow up, and I mean, it already, you know, it already has. And I feel like the more support and the more people, you know, just shining their shine, like it's freaking awesome. And I'm really glad to be in the neighborhood.
That's cool. I mean, I think you're pointing out the idea of paying attention to history, historical, like what has our neighborhood done to keep it attractive to this point? And also, I mean, if you think about history and how it's evolved to today of other neighborhoods in Omaha, like how do we understand what is being done in other neighborhoods? And I won't call any particular areas out, but if you can imagine and say, hey, we don't necessarily want that, like being conscious of that as far as a driver of gentrification, I think is important. Thank you. Yeah.
I think the biggest thing, I think one of the biggest things though that just personally and just seeing it as it grows, I think a big focus needs to be, because it kind of started out as like this beaten path of bars, you know, that I think that's kind of like where a lot of people want to go with it, like, oh, you know, like really focusing in on and bringing like this light to the children that are on, you know, those pledge programs, because that is like the future, and that is, we need that future. We need that future of creativity, because, you know, it especially in those impoverished areas, like it is those schools where like arts are cut, like arts are cut. That's the first to go. And I've worked in a lot of, you know, schools in the area and with the arts, and you know, it's, so if we can really build that, that's our future, and that's the future of this. So you really have to.
I love it. I mean, the idea, I think you're describing, just tying the folks who have done this work. I think it's important to think about gentrification, about all of these improvements, is that Benson is the way it is because of the people who have built it to be that way. So the idea of learning from them, including them in shepherding the next generation of young folks to understand and see the world that creatives, that artists did, is really cool. That's awesome. And to kind of even just use that to transition into being more deliberate about talking about artists, creatives. You know, you hear that word artist or creative. I'm not looking to define it for you. I think you all can make that assumption. If it's a painter that you want to consider an artist, if it's somebody who's talking about design thinking, and you know, a sculptress, whatever it is, how do we make it easy for those folks to live, work, and I think most importantly, shape culture in Benson? So I want to open this up to ideas. You know, this isn't just the infrastructure for the community. It isn't just a cool improvement. This is about how do we shape artists, support artists. Think about things like resources, infrastructure for artists and creatives, the direct support for artists and creatives, partnerships, exposure. What are some of the things that come to mind?
What the sharing is huge for like resource like I mentioned before, we have a letterpress studio in our garage, and I'm not using that all the time, you know? And I love teaching people to use it because it's a thing that's kind of a high dollar entry point usually. And so if you go to like a professional artist who has a really professional print shop, it's gonna cost you $1,000 for a week or something, but like, I will show somebody how to typeset for free. And I know there's other people who live in the neighborhood who want to offer, you know, their space, their tools, and have kind of shared, like almost a library of spaces and tools.
A library of sources and tools. So sharing equipment, that sounds so cool. Like I would absolutely go tour that as a non-hands-on artist. I would think that would be really cool. So sharing resources, sharing tools within the community. Any other ideas? How do we get those folks here that maybe aren't here?
I think we sort of brought it up a little bit earlier, but just affordable live work spaces. And there's many ways to do that. But one example that came out of this afternoon's meeting, which was really good, is trying to build relationships with some of the building owners that might have spaces that, you know, they're not thinking could be used for in a clear way, but we as artists can see how it can be used and maybe deals with them. Get space in an affordable, at an affordable base.
Yeah, so I mean, quite honestly, the basics like living or, you know, a place to live. I mean, does that come in a form of direct payment of a program of granting? Do you all have any idea how that might look beyond just, hey, there's housing available? You ever seen anything that would like that would help?
There's the Arts Loss and Council Bluffs. That's a larger project. It's a similar concept. I think that something on the scale or as professionalized as that would maybe be a little bit not exactly what would be fitting in Benson, I imagine. Something comparable to Benson being a little bit more chopped up into smaller spaces or something that just is a little bit less, I don't know, I'm trying to struggle. Arts nonprofits and the nonprofit world in general, especially when it comes to large investments. That loft project, Arts Loft project, is a massive project to turn this giant old warehouse into many, many art spaces. And it's a great project, but I think any investment, even philanthropic of that scale, all once into Benson would be kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
I think that would be destabilizing in some way.
So to summarize, kind of talking about the artist loss in Council Bluffs, but creating it or creating that in a way that it fits the footprint and culture of Benson, smaller scale, make it more consumable. I think you said slow growth earlier. That would fit that idea as well too. I have Wayne is online right here. I want to share with the group, talking about working with building owners. So, you know, quite literally just getting people who maybe have empty buildings to, I think, you know, better use that space, allow for pop-up art shows, a house or a building that can serve as a communal art and or creative space. So a similar idea, if you had maybe a tools library, where's the library for actually constructing things, for making it happen, that's open and accessible. So like it's brought up as the do space, the artistic or hands-on creative of the do space for Benson. That'd be an interesting visual to create the do space through a lens of the Benson neighborhood.
Yeah.
Be cool.
Think about people that I've been in bars a couple times where I oh yeah, I own a house like 2 blocks away. Like, how do we get those people to not rent to necessarily individuals or reinvest in renting to individuals that have specific skills that then can use that space as a living space and a workspace to invite people in to share that space. And then we create like a little library, but it's like all in one space.
So, and I want to correct me if I'm saying this not representatively of what you just described. So would it be that like the community would help tenants or potential renters be artists? So maybe people who own those buildings and are renting spaces, if we were able to say like, hey, here's a list of people that we know are looking, is that?
Yeah. Thank you for bringing it.
Yeah.
Well, I know some people that own some property along Maple Bars that, you know, are kind of creating it into gallery, like, or not gallery, studio spaces. So I mean, it is, you know, it is on people's radars for sure, so.
Wayne just online here mentioned studio spaces, so yeah.
The Union for Contemporary Art, like, that's an amazing resource, being able to use those spaces. It's very, very affordable. It's it would like something like that in Benson would be amazing. Even if it was a smaller scale kind of satellite location or something of that nature, as far as, you know, more like maybe let's talk about shared, you know, screen printing equipment, various, you know, things that are.
That's cool.
I mean, I think it's important too to think about like screen printing is one of those things that's got a high economic kind of incentive to do because it's produced pretty cheaply, you can make a lot of good stuff. People are interested in buying t-shirts and things like that. Ceramics against the same thing. So it's just like kind of focusing on things that are, it's like you're thinking how much does it cost to invest in this like collective resource and what's the potential benefit to how many people?
Yeah.
And so it's like go less for like the flashy things, like we gotta get 17 computers with a bunch of coding equipment. I mean, that's probably cool, but like if you can invest in a kiln, it's a lot cheaper, and that can provide, you know, possible income for 10 artists. You know, that would be
One, like a kiln, like something like a kiln would be more, you know, I mean, keeping it where it's also, like you say, small growth. I mean, the Union, you know, it's a very well invested, nonprofit. It's a constant growth, you know, it's just a lot of tree growing, but so how do you do that on a small scale? It's like more grassroots. I feel like that's like grassroots, and keeping it how I'm not keeping it weird. If you kind of want to keep it to that like that medium kind of nonprofit scale, you bet like a kiln, like, you know, and there's some flavors downtown, you know, flavors, but great, thank goodness so much, you know, and you know, for a few bucks you go and vote, you know, have something to fire, like, you know, so something that's really, you know, that's supporting the economy.
Yeah, I think the conversation around the Union doing cool things and how do we replicate that in Benson? How do we maybe, I mean, does it, and I'm not an artist, but like, is there a way that we could even collaborate or understand through partnership? Like, how do we, or how is what we would offer artists complementary to other potential districts in our city? How could it overlap? How could we not, if we have a typeset press, I think it's what you described, and they don't, like, how do we say like, hey, come on over and check this out? Like, can we share resources, skills with even other folks within the city, create that exchange? I think that's, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, building on resources, I think there's a lot of untapped resources or resources that people aren't necessarily aware of that already exist in Benson, like Origin Arts Collective doesn't cost anything to be a member. If you're a teaching artist, the space, classes, whatever. And so it's spaces like that, or Benson Community Centers have been utilized as well. And like, how can we approach those spaces to engage more people to, like, you know, so that everyone's aware of actually what already exists in Benson and how can we pull our existing resources to
Preschool, do you still have that space like?
yes.
Yeah.
I don't look at that space as like a more community space would be that. Yeah.
So what's being discussed here is almost repurposing, not repurposing, but bringing awareness to what we already have. It's already being done. How do we get people to use it all day? For instance, Wayne online here is mentioning music or studio space. you can't purchase musical or support local music. I know even earlier in the earlier session, we talked about dance space. There's, and one of the people had mentioned that they'd looked into this empty building that previously existed on the main strip, and they're like, wow, I can picture a dance floor there, for instance. And like, how do we think about what we already have might just be sitting there? Can we polish it up and it be a real asset for creatives and artists in the area? Love it.
About the space on the street. What if they got the kind of building? They were doing dance classes here. And it's tiny.
Oh, we talked about the pear tree.
Oh, pear
Pear tree.
Yeah, they are, we reached out to them too.
Okay, yeah. But I mean, they're still continuing to see that whole property.
Yes, I have that space and it's been used. I drive by there and see kids. performing those acts and all that. Yeah, I mean, it's always been there, but it's been utilized.
Yeah.
So the creative district could increase utilization from not just our community, but bring other folks in too,
Well, just, yeah, like utilizing just the nonprofits that, you know, connecting and crossing paths just with nonprofits that are and collaborating.
Just for people to understand like what's available as far as spaces, because I know just from some experience in the past when I'm very DIY, very non-legitimate, very non-nonprofit spaces. If you open space to people and you say it's free and you just have to sign up for a calendar date, it's instantly utilized. So like, I think for people to have an understanding of what size spaces are available, like what capacities, you know, is there a stage? Are there chairs already there? Are there tables already there? And just have an understanding of like, what are the prices for these spaces? Are there any that are free? Which ones are the lowest cost? It just like, because I think what you're talking about a little bit is programming spaces that already exist. They're struggling to do programming, right? Need like a staff person. Right. But if there's just a calendar and some collective ability to plan a concert, yeah, it's just like, it just opens the door. Everybody wants to use space.
so if we were to centralize the inventory of space, of resources, of tools, and allow people to view that from a centralized spot and pick and choose and compare what they need.
Like, call the hotline.
Yeah,
Hey, I want to have a birthday party for 50 people. I need a sink. They're right.
like it.
That's a good, I think, not segue, but mention of our experience Benson.com website, which started a while ago by Benson for the district, but since it already exists and one of our partners manages it, we're going to be using that website to have a communications infrastructure of some sort. We're not sure how to look at for the district. And so I think that what you just said, a full teach of, you know, inventory of spaces on that website. So I've got it written down.
Yeah, and Brittany in the chat here mentioned a very similar comment around that. So the idea of we've talked about infrastructure here today. What do you want to see added to the district? We haven't even discussed really in depth what digitally we could be doing. So I mean, I think that could be for another time because the possibilities are quite literally endless on that. So I mean, with respect to kind of everybody who's tuned in, that's kind of what we were here to talk about. I wanted to, you know, stoke up hopefully a creative conversation, bring in some points of view. And again, we're gonna take what your voices and what you've shared here tonight, and combine them with what all the other information that we've collected. And we hope to distill that and really be transparent about sharing out what we've discovered. But in those next steps, I want to turn it over to Linda here to describe what those next steps do look like and what you might be able to expect going forward.
So like I just mentioned, the experiencebenson.com webpage, we will keep that updated with minutes from this meeting, also the meeting we had in December. If you missed that, there's a recap there as well. And then we'll also just kind of keep everyone updated on when we submit the application and when we're approved. So if you can, please email me, for those who are online, I mentioned earlier in the chat, if you could send me an email, linda@bffomaha.com, with your name, so we can capture everyone on our contact list. And there's a sign-in sheet here physically. So that's kind of the general way to keep in touch. But if you want to get more involved, we also have different committees that are starting to work on the application. And they're broken up into 8 different committees. I won't go through them all, but all the way from data collection to identifying the culture of the neighborhood, education, workforce development, all sorts of stuff. So if there's anything that you have particular expertise in, you want to get your hands dirty in this application process, it's not too late. We will be working on it pretty intensely this month, with the hope to try and submit in April. So there is a physical sign-up sheet here, but for anyone who is interested in getting involved in the committee, just say so in your email that you send me later.
Also, within that email, yes, you can communicate that way, but for folks online and here, you can see that you can take that survey that we've been talking about throughout the presentation and discussion tonight, with this link here. For folks that are here, it's that yellow flyer. So if you want to take one of those with you, and again, that's open for you to share any ideas that might pop up in the future. I know I'm a recovering introvert, so it may have, if I would have sat here 10 years ago, I wouldn't have probably said anything and done it all online. So you're free to do that. We want to get your voices included on an ongoing basis. That survey also prompts you to maybe sign up or express interest that Linda just mentioned around joining committees. So you can also communicate that way, either via email directly to her or through that survey. With that, I think we've wrapped up in a pretty decent amount of time here. I want to thank everybody online for joining us. I know it's always a little bit of disconnect when we're trying to do 2 things at once. So I appreciate your patience. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to via the survey or to Linda or myself or Alex Jockum, and we will hopefully follow up with this conversation. So again, thanks everybody. I'm going to shut this down. Take care. Have a great night.
Thank you.